If the students hear the music prior to having to sing the music, then they are not sight reading.
Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. This is episode 105. Work less hard, have better choirs. Does this sound too good to be true? Well, it is if you are thinking that there is a quick and easy pill to swallow in order to get to that next level in your career. You know, the one we always dream about, where the choir director simply issues wisdom, waves their arms, says inspirational things, and the choir just makes these beautiful noises, right? In reality, we dream of this, but getting there isn't easy. It does actually exist, though. Now, what those beautiful sounds sound like, of course, is going to vary from program to program and level to level. But there is a certain amount of technique and a certain amount of philosophy that goes into building that reality for you. That's why I can't quite pull the trigger on selling the Choralosophy Method, in air quotes, even though many have asked me to do this. I just don't know if it would be ethical, because fundamentally we master our craft one tiny victory and defeat at a time. I truly believe that finding your groove in the classroom has more to do with the work you do on you than the method that you choose. It's the other reason I don't think I could sell the Choralosophy Method, because nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to buy a method where the lesson one, suck less, or be better than you currently are. No, we don't want to turn the mirror around on ourselves. But I'm here to tell you that we have to. We have to. Each summer, which is why I'm putting this episode out now, it's the beginning of summer for me. I've been out of school now for a week. I've had a chance to think back on the last school year and think about the successes and the failures and what I'm going to do better as a teacher next year. Because I do that every year, every single year. I think about that. I don't work so hard in the summer. I don't try to do very much work in terms of professional development other than all the things that I really enjoy doing anyway. But I do think about it and I reflect. And here's the number one thing. I assume that all of the bad things that happened, all of the failures, were my fault. What did I do to cause that problem? Benjamin Zander famously said in his TED Talk that's got like 20 million views, go check it out, Benjamin Zander, who am I being that my students' eyes are not shining? So in that situation, I look back on each school year and think about what I could have done. So in this episode, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put together the Choralosophy Method, using clips and commentary from several episodes throughout the history of this show that focus specifically on how to get to the point where in our programs, the classroom is running itself and that the choir director themselves is not feeling the heavy burden of every single note and every single rhythm that is happening in the choir room. The choir director is no longer feeling the burden of every single success and every single failure. That is a team effort. And what do the students have to do? What does the teacher have to do to get to that point? So we're going to put it together, and hopefully, if you are new to the show, this will be your first introduction to some of these concepts. If you have been listening for quite a while, then you're going to hear some little clips of episodes that you might have heard years ago. And that could refresh your memory of some ideas and some concepts to try for next year. The value, of course, of this episode is it is a distillation of what would be the Choralosophy Method if I were to package it and sell it. Instead, you get to listen to it for free. The Choralosophy Podcast gets a major kick in the pants every month from the folks over at Patreon. You too could kick me in the pants by signing up for the Patreon at $3 a month or more if you appreciate the content. In fact, heck, if the whole audience were to sign up at $3 a month to this show and support the show on Patreon, I could do this show full time. Like, that would be incredible. So if you appreciate this content, sign up there for as little as a cup of coffee. You can show your support and appreciation there, plus all kinds of free goodies over at patreon.com/Choralosophy. Producers over there are Brannigan Lawrence, Vasquez Academy of Music, John Warner, Ulrike Igrain Munoz Alarcon, Angie Schilling, Chandler Smith, David Kowalczyk, James Mock, Jeff Wall, Kyle Peterson, Michael Herron, Nathan Hines, Ryan Main, and Stephen Kathy Kakachik. I've discovered that Distinguished Concerts International in New York, DCINY, is far and above the rest, especially for those of us from parts of the country that don't turn out for the arts in the way that New York does. Your students, your singers deserve that. I've had personal experiences with a few different companies that have done this type of tour, and I can tell you that it matters who you choose. It matters who you entrust your students' dollars, their time, their energy, and their hopes for a trip like this, because it's a big deal. And for the students, oftentimes it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Check out the offerings that they have there at dciny.org.
If the students hear the music prior to having to sing the music, then they are not sight reading. At some level, they are mimicking, they are responding. So that's one. If the students are singing along with notes being played for them on the keyboard, they are not sight reading. They are also following along, but at quick response. And if you listen very closely to choirs that do this, the notes from the singers do come slightly after the notes on the piano, meaning it's not really sight reading. So a way I would think about that is if you had a young, new English reader in your class, or maybe your biological child that's at home like I do, trying to learn how to read English. We would sit there next to them with the See Spot Run book, or whatever it is, and the child then reads the words slowly, but we are reading them out loud slowly with the child. We might do that as one of the preliminary steps to help them read, but we would not turn around and then say, "Good job, you read the book," because they didn't read the book. They followed along with a guide, right? So the question is, if you could wave a wand at your classroom and fill it with readers, true readers, meaning they are not getting the information played for them prior or during the exercise, would you?
So that clip comes from episode 18, Ripping Off the Band-Aid, which was the first attempt that I made on the show to create some type of a how-to episode, which I think, first of all, was very well received, but overall that clip did get me in a little bit of trouble, partly because I'm making statements about what is and what is not reading. Of course, the misunderstanding, as I see it, comes from, or what is the source of that information, which is the science of reading itself. Some of those statements that you heard me make are true about, well, they all are true, about what is and is not reading. Now, where people got their panties in a bunch a little bit was interpreting into those statements something that I did not say, which is that, and if it isn't reading, it's bad. I never said that. There are all kinds of ways that we learn to read music and that we learn to read English or whatever language that it is, without just simply picking up a book or picking up a piece of paper and looking at the paper. There is, of course, the sound before sight concept as well, where that's where that role for rote instruction comes in. In that clip, though, I am simply describing what is and what is not reading, and I think it's an important distinction for us to have if our goal is that kids can eventually pick up the piece of sheet music and simply sing it without any type of prompting, then that understanding how the neural process is working with singers and with readers of any language is very, very important. In the next clip, you're going to hear also back to about 2 years ago, episode 21, which was called Anyone Can Get an A, in which I tie the concept together of learning to read with also then being able to grade based on where the kid starts versus where they end up. And we are so lucky in music education, at least in the United States, where politicians have not yet put their grubby little fingers on our curriculums in most places, meaning there's no state-mandated curriculum for me. There's no state-mandated standardized test that kids have to pass, which means that I get to decide what an A looks like in my class. I don't have to follow some prescription, which is great because then I don't have to adhere to what I think is just an awful educational practice anyway, which is these arbitrary grade level standards. Now, I used to do that. And then years have gone by where I've discovered that actually the level of everyone's achievement is increased in my program since we dropped grade level expectations and just simply went to each kid. What do you need? Can you get better than you are right now? In which case you are getting an A. If you are not, then you're not going to get an A. You've got to do the work, but everyone can.
It's focused on the individual student, and it's growth focused. So the kid who nails a level 5 and the kid who nails a level 1 can both get an A. They can both get an A, but because they need to demonstrate that they've grown over time. We've even had some kids where if pitch matching is an issue on their first pretest, we might tell them that singing the scale and arpeggio and not changing keys is their first semester final. So because obviously if they can't do that, they can't read a level 1, right? So there is and that kid can still get an A, by the way. If they achieve their goal, by the time their final happens, they can get an A, and we have a rubric that we grade all of this with to determine a letter grade.
Ultimately, one of the problems that I see in music education very broadly is that we are struggling with a dichotomy, which is that our jobs depend on enrollment numbers. And so some of us make the mistake of thinking that we just need to give everyone an A. If we give everyone an A, then they're less likely to drop out. Well, that is probably true for some kids, but I'm going to make the argument that in the aggregate, overall, we will lose kids when they start to think that our class is a joke, which means that it falls on us now to come up with a way to grade. Come up with a way to grade that is rigorous, that keeps the carrot always dangled out in front of their face. In other words, they feel challenged, they feel like they're working towards something, and they feel like the grade they earn is really earned. Because without that, they might think you're cool, and they might think your class is cool, but they're not going to see it as an integral part of their education. And ultimately, I think retention long-term for students comes from that. And so in this next little clip, you're going to hear a little bit of that concept being described from another short episode that you can find in the podcast feed about the concept of grading on growth specifically, in which you'll find, if you go back and listen to that, some very detailed information about ways that I implement that concept into my curriculum. And really the problem that I think we in our profession have to continually balance between holding our ensembles and our students to high expectations, setting goals that are lofty for them, musical ideals that they should have to achieve or we should help them achieve, but at the same time being able to meet each student where they are and help them love singing. Is there a way to balance those things? In other words, do you have to be the choir program that just everybody's amazing all the time? And if they're not amazing, they get a D and they think they suck at singing forever. Or do you have to be the program that just loves everybody and there's no audition and everybody is told they're awesome all the time? Or is there something in between? Can there be a balance? The next clip comes from episode 52, which was an episode with John Sargent. John is a listener from California and colleague who heard episode 18 and episode 21 way back when they first came out and reached out to have an opportunity to come onto the show and interview me, where he said, okay, so now I've been trying some of these things, and where do I go from here? Here are the things that worked. Here are the things that I had to tweak. And I thought that was really great because one of the things that I want to remind everyone every chance I get is that a lot of the methods that I'm presenting here to you and the philosophies that I'm presenting here to you are the way they work for me. Now, I do believe very strongly in the overarching principles of all of these things, and I think that in some form they would work for all of you at every level of choir, all the way from elementary school all the way up to adult professionals. And I have opportunities in my career to try many of those things, many of those concepts. However, they're not going to look the same for you as they are for me. And in that conversation in episode 52 with John, that's made very apparent. He had to take ideas that he found from my show and my concept and apply them in his world. But in this clip, I highlight one very core component to my literacy method, which is the specific process that I go through in order to get kids to be able to sight read things that most adults can't sight read. And that is a real thing, a real and true phenomenon that has occurred in my classroom over the years. And one of the things that people oftentimes overlook is how kids are singing and not just what they're singing. I've discovered that you just can't separate those things. sight reading ability actually gets better when the vocal technique is getting better. You can't go, okay, first we're going to teach kids to read the music and the notes, and then we'll teach them to sing well, or vice versa. It doesn't work either way as well as if you combine those two concepts. The clip after that, I'm just going to let it play, is a portion of the Iowa ACDA presentation that I did last summer in 2021, where I go through some concepts of how I use Sight Reading Factory in the classroom. In a very similar way, how do I introduce these concepts at the very beginning of the year? And of course, I encourage you, with all the clips that I'm showing in this episode, to go back and listen to the entire episode. But if you don't have time, you do, though. You do have time. Go back and listen to them. But in the meantime, this episode should distill all of those ideas and those concepts down into smaller bites that you can think about and ask questions about. Of course, at choralosophy@gmail.com. You can reach out with questions. Of course, on the Patreon, that's the best way to do it. And then there's the Choralosophers Facebook group that you can join, and we can start talking about all this stuff. Okay, sing do. Do. No, what did you sing? Oh, that was a 0.5. Sing a 5, right? So from the very first note of the exercise, and this is the part that I didn't really have a chance to get into in episode 18. It's not just about putting exercises on the screen. You have to make them sing a certain kind of way. And that is the key to all of my success in this area, is that from the first day of school, I make them sing with their whole voice. Because what I need them to do is I need them to get used to the idea that there isn't a sight reading voice or a warm-up voice and then a singing songs voice. It's the same voice all the time. And I don't care if you know the notes, you don't know the notes, because ultimately what am I trying to do in the beginning of 9th grade is I'm trying to train the fear of singing out of them. It's like, I want to hear your mistakes. I want to hear everything that you're doing so that we can talk about it. There we go. Yep. And again, keeping in mind, this is just still day 2 of the school year. I want to go slow with the concepts that are being introduced at the beginning of the year. I don't want to throw too many curveballs at them. And so I will go ahead and say, okay, now we're in the key of G. Yesterday we were in the key of F. We'll talk about that later. But now our do is one note above where it was yesterday, and we'll go through the same process, which I won't bore you with right now. You can kind of get the idea. So the big, yeah, just 1 second. Let me finish this thought and then I'll take your question. So the big concept here is that I am responding to them, not using my own agenda of how fast this goes. That's really, really important. Because if you leave them in the dust, pushing them ahead, here's the problem that sometimes we don't think about. With whatever group of kids we have in front of us, there will be some kids who can move ahead at the pace you want the class to move. When you allow that to happen, then those kids who are the best kids will start to feel like they're the only kids that matter, and everyone else will just start following. That's something we really want to avoid. Like, we want this to move at a pace that everybody can keep up. And the way, of course, that you determine that is you determine that by eyeballs. When the eyeballs in the room start glazing over, you know you've lost them. And then came episode 69. Higher standards with lower anxiety, in which I go through the process of grading how we grade each individual sight singer twice a year. Every student in choir, grade them twice a year with a pretest in October, which means that they are with a teacher 3 times throughout the course of the year, in addition to their practice on their own. And in this episode, I even talked some students into recording one of their sight reading exams. Here's what one of those sounds like. Give F. Sing do. Scale and arpeggio. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, fa, mi, re, do. Do, ti, la, so, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Do, mi, so, mi, do, fa, la, fa. Do, mi, so, mi, do, so, do. Very nice. Go ahead and practice for 20 seconds. Okay, sing do. 1, 2, and 3. Do, mi, so, mi, re, re, mi, do, ti, do. to go back and fix? Or a part that never quite sounded right?
Like all of it? Probably measure 2 and measure 5 and 6.
So measure 2 was where you went
Yeah.
off.
Yeah.
And that's what made the rest of it feel weird. You did eventually calm down. Okay, so see if you can sing from the beginning again, and then land correctly on measure 2.
Okay.
Try that.
Do, mi, so, mi, re, mi, do, ti, do. Mi, sorry. Do, mi, so, so.
See, yes, and then once you got there, once you get there with having fixed that note, everything else after that got easier.
Yes.
The only major rule you broke was the no sorry rule.
Yeah.
No sorries. You
No
just go back and
sorry.
fix it.
Okay.
Okay, cool. You're
Awesome.
done. Great demonstration. See, I actually love that Morgan broke the no sorry rule that I have in class, because that's something we talk about all the time. I don't want you to say you're sorry after you make a mistake. So one of the fascinating developments that has occurred over the course of the years presenting information to you and to the audience about my thoughts and practices related to building a choral curriculum and focusing it on achievement and focusing it on rigor and all of those aspects that I talk about and that I preach is the backlash that has come in the cultural realm about that topic. And of course, I've heard all kinds of things from, well, sight reading is really just a white European construct that only is important in certain types of music, and therefore, why are you centering it in your classroom? And I have dealt with that question many times. I've also been dealing with one of the elephants in the room related to the overall level of musicianship at the university level, and my belief that it is in steep decline. And some programs, some choir programs and even instrumental programs are removing certain aspects of musicianship from admission to the schools and also from passing. In other words, are we handing out degrees in music to people who can't read music? I find that very problematic, and again plays back into the idea of our self-inflicted wound that we are putting on ourselves as musicians and as music academics when people get frustrated, or we get frustrated that other people don't view us as a real academic subject. Well, why do you think that is? If it's getting easier and easier and easier to get those degrees. Now, I imagine that this is true in other fields too, and part of that has to do with the economics of higher education, which is a totally different can of worms. But in this next episode, actually the next 2 clips that you're going to hear, one is episode 86 with Odell Ziegler. The other one is episode 90 with Carol Krieger, which, by the way, both of those episodes were extremely popular episodes on the show, with lots of feedback and lots of downloads. Both of these episodes were unique and interesting in that they addressed these ideas head on. So with Odell, we had a chance to talk about education in, for lack of a better term, non-white classrooms. And how is it possible that just because something was invented in one context, namely Europe by white people, does that mean that that tool is no longer helpful or extremely important for kids that do not fall into that category? Of course, I argue, and Odell helped me think through this topic, I argue that just because it was created somewhere, that has zero bearing on whether or not it is useful now, an extremely important part of the educational process now. And then with the conversation with Dr. Krieger, that's where we get into the really heavy-hitting stuff with what's going on in higher ed and what type of repair is now being needed in higher ed to make sure that music educators themselves know how to not only read music, but also to teach people how to read music. Because as the trend starts to move away from that level of importance, then we are, in my opinion, in for a world of hurt. Because as Carol describes in this clip and in the episode, which you have to listen to if you haven't, I've actually gone back and listened to it a couple times because of how much wisdom she drops in that episode. But it is my belief that if we don't right this ship, we're going to see a shrinking in our profession that is pretty dramatic and pretty stark. The reason for that is ultimately like she describes, which is that if kids feel like they aren't good at it, they will quit. And in my experience, there is no better hook than the power that a kid feels when you hand them a piece of music and they can sing it without your help. They feel powerful, they feel competent, and then they also have the other psychological aspects of education that the science shows us that they need, which is autonomy and freedom and a feeling of competence. Literacy creates all of these things. Good vocal technique creates these things. And again, all of those concepts are built into our classrooms through rigorous grading standards and through a overarching curriculum that is built on growth and on accountability for the students and for the educators. So stick around, listen to these 2 short clips, and I'll be back with you with some final thoughts.
I've been fortunate to be in that setting, and that worked. But then, in my urban setting, that's the goal for me still. And it's, I want to be clear about that, because I don't want people to look at it as, well, why we just can't do, teach by rote and they could just sing and sound wonderful.
Because it takes forever.
Yes.
It takes forever.
Yeah.
And I'd like to do other things. I'd like to talk about poetry, and I'd like to talk about vocal pedagogy, and I'd like to talk about, so literacy is crucial. So that is you're definitely in agreement here on this show. We're a big sight reading show here.
Thank you.
And but one of the things, and I'm glad you say that, because using rote as a tool for teaching and building overall literacy is different than teaching by rote exclusively, because sight reading is not that important anyway. Like, to me, those are 2 totally different positions.
And we can catch them up by going back and filling in those gaps. And so whose fault is it? It's been doing this for a long time, unfortunately. And I think it's up to a few people like us, and hopefully others that join in, that say, I want my kids to read. I don't want to have to be banging the piano the rest of my life. I want them to go sit under a tree and figure it out. I want them to really be able to compose because they hear it and audiate. Mm-hmm. Could I said, we should be teaching our students like we adults do with reading a book. We should teach them to open up their score, silently read it, audiate the whole thing. You step to the podium, raise your hand, give the downbeat, and you have instant sound.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't happen. And even
it happens in my classroom.
Okay, but you said they have to work at getting those skills.
Yes.
So when they walk in your room, you're giving them those basic skills.
Yes, it eventually happens.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Thank God you're doing that.
Yeah.
But you realize how many don't.
Right.
And so I guess for me, I just want my kids to love music. And the more they understand it, the more they hear it, the more they audiate it, the more they can improv with it, the more they own it, and the more they want to do it.
So, of course, it goes without saying, but it's important because it helps me a lot to say that without Sight Reading Factory, none of the things that I just outlined or do on a regular basis would even work. I'm old enough to remember when sight reading had to be pulled out of textbooks and figuring out some way to photocopy and or put packets in kids' folders that they could physically go get in order to get ready for sight reading. And of course, if you procrastinate like I do all the time in every aspect of my life, then that was always, I would push it to the side because it was so much work to get new repertoire and new reading exercises in front of kids on a regular basis that the stuff I do now just wasn't possible. When I was first starting to teach. Sight Reading Factory came out, and I started using it on a regular basis way before Choralosophy podcast started. I've been doing it for years, and just kind of working with them as they have updated so many things and so many features. So ultimately, I'm able to pivot to the needs of my students so quickly with Sight Reading Factory. That's the main reason that I think it's the best tool out there. It is so customizable to every aspect and every student that you might encounter, and you can do it so quickly, which is the best part of it. You don't have to plan the material ahead of time. You just know it's there. So I encourage you to use Choralosophy at checkout, get your memberships, get memberships for your kids, and then renew them every year with that checkout code. Save 10%, and then it helps me a lot too, because then I get to keep preaching the gospel that is music literacy. So interesting things throughout this entire episode. And again, I will guilt you, I will shame you into remembering to go back and listen to the episodes that you have not listened to that I highlighted here. Because I really do think, as I said at the very beginning, that it's not a magic bullet. Nothing I gave you is a quick and easy fix. And I think that's ultimately where serious professional educators need to shift their mind. We need to shift our mind away from getting quick and easy answers in Facebook groups. We need to shift our mind towards waiting for the convention once a year to get professional development. And it's obvious that I think that because that's why I do this show. I have the ability to get the word out to thousands of people about a variety of topics where we get to think about why we do what we do, in addition to how we do what we do. Because ultimately, I think of myself as a professional. Okay, I'm a professional educator. I want to be the expert in the room, and I want to always be better than I was the year before. And if I have those mindsets, then I'm no longer looking for the quick fix. I'm thinking of my career then as the long game. Now, because again, I'm old, and in fact, I joke about that a lot, about being old. However, I would like to present evidence. Go on the YouTube channel and look at the color of my beard now versus when the show started in 2019. It's gross, you guys. It is gross. I have white throughout every part of my beard, and when I started the show, it was completely whiteless. And so, yes, this old joke is getting a little bit too real at this point. So I'm at the point now where I'm, 20 years in. Next year will be year 20 for me as an educator, which means I'm on the downhill slide of at least the public education part of my career. Because, of course, I'm going to, teach until I get the best retirement package and then go do some other stuff. That is my dream. But what I want to be able to do is be able to always think about every aspect, every step along the way as a growth process, and never as something that is a quick fix or a quick rearrange, right? Because what I would rather us think about is how we make our decisions first. Like, what is the process that we are using to make our decisions? Are we rationalizing? Are we looking for evidence? Are we looking for data? Are we looking for the science behind it? Right? These are time-consuming. They require reading books. They require listening to podcasts, which you're doing so far. That's one of the two. And understanding what it is that goes in behind the underneath of what it is that you teach. In fact, on the Patreon, on the way out, go to the Patreon. $3 a month level gets you the private podcast feed. My most recent Patreon-only episode was looking through my choir program's data on sight reading. What happened in 21-22 school year with program-wide, of course don't name their names, but we go through the proportions of kids reading level 1s, level 2s, level 3s, 4, 5, and 6s, and how that grew over the course of the year. And so that just give you an idea. Are you evaluating your own data, even if the school district doesn't tell you to? Right? These are the types of things that professional educators do. So I'm going to encourage you to listen to all those episodes, and of course continue to reach out through the Patreon, reach out through Choralosophy's Facebook page, or through the website choralosophy.com, choralosophy@gmail, and of course I'm on all the social medias. So I'm very easy to find. If you have questions, hit me up. Let's be professional educators together.